Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
All right, so it's Ron Crabtree here, your host for MetaPod, and we're going to get into another deep dive here around skills related to supply chain. Procurement in particular, and one of those top three areas that we need to develop, those must-have supplier performance, workforce skills, things like that. And we're going to have here where Jeoff Burris, we're really pleased to have her with us, is going to be elaborating a bit on this. And this is a podcast that's really for you if you want to look how to increase your purchasing power, reduce the sourcing costs, ensure you're buying at the right price, dealing with total cost of ownership challenges, inflationary pressures, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really looking forward to what Jeff's going to have to say. He's got a fantastic background in procurement, hammered out arguably the biggest, baddest, toughest supply chain in the world in the automotive industry. And Jeff and I go back a number of years. So Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll have you introduce you here in just a second, but just as a refresher, in this podcast, we'll start with diagnostic. I'll ask Jeff to share what are those top three areas of ability, competency, and skills in the procurement workforce that we really should be working hard on here in the near future, and then follow that with some practical how-to. What do you do about that? If you've done the assessment, determined we have gaps, what are the practical things we could do to start closing those gaps so that we can improve our future capabilities of organization and all the individuals who work for us. So with that, Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Thanks, Ron. Really appreciate it. I always say I didn't grow up with a mommy whispering in my ear, Jeff, you want to be in purchasing. I started off wanting to be in operations, got an undergraduate degree, went to work for Cummins Engine Company as a production supervisor, got caught up in the Reagan-Carter recession, whoever you want to blame that one on, and then got my master's degree. It was the folks from Ford Motor Company who whispered in my ear, you want to be in purchasing? And said, no, I want to be in operations. And they kept talking to me and they said, well, you got to realize that 70% of every sales dollar is controlled by purchasing within Ford. And we've got a big problem because we've been solely buying on price. By buying on price means that you have to have many suppliers in the supply base on every commodity. Our buyers don't understand cost structure. And we're getting beat up by the Japanese on quality and losing market share. And at the time, GM, Ford, and Chrysler had 85% of the U.S. market share in vehicles, and they were concerned about it. They wanted to drastically reduce the number of suppliers in their supply base, but they knew that in order to do that, they were going to have buyers who understood cost and then could collaborate with fewer suppliers. So fast forward, I spent 13 years at Ford. When I left, I had responsibility for brake, steering, and suspension on a global basis. Went to work for an automotive supplier, Simpson Industries, $500 million company, running purchasing and then running a P&L division. Got caught up in private equity, and I put up with that for about 2 years. And then went to Magna Seating, ran purchasing for Magna Seating, $2.5 billion worth of purchases. Miss the autonomy I had running my own business. And I thought 20 years ago, almost to this day, if I don't start my own business now, I'll get to be 65 and start a business when I'm 65. So 20 years later, running advanced purchasing dynamics, running it based upon what drew me to Ford to begin with, understanding cost, collaborating with the supply base against the common enemy, cost, to take cost out.
All right. Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. There's a lot of things I know you could talk about. And but to keep things simple, we actually kind of think about the top three areas that most organizations have to be looking at to cope with the ongoing pressures to, digitize, do more with less, dealing with the forever labor shortage, and the fact that, inflationary pressures, and some cases actually we have a deflation or a recession with freight going on right now, which is probably going to turn around pretty quick with golden quarter coming, but different things going on. So I kind of cast you pitching kind of like in your mind, well, universal industry perspective, it would be like the top three skill competency areas, organizationally and individually, that really should be looked at very hard to cope with the ongoing changes and challenges in supply management. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I took the assignment and thought about it, and I came up with the three. And number one was not even a thought, right? It's always top of my mind, and that's negotiation. I believe negotiation is a fundamental skill that needs to happen within purchasing. Why? It needs to happen externally with the suppliers, but almost as importantly, internally with the engineering operations. We were, as purchasers, we're tasked with representing our suppliers to the rest of the company and negotiating on their behalf. So I believe it's a foundational skill for purchasing. And I was kind of shocked when I was doing a little study before this, and I found a study that was University of Tennessee found that when they surveyed 240 purchasing professionals, one of the top skills was negotiation, right? But only 15% of those surveyed thought their company, their organization, was handling negotiation properly as a skill development within the company. Right? It found another article that said, and this one was from ISM, that said that sales outstrips purchasing on training per sales employee versus training per purchasing employee. You get what you pay for, right? You're not going to train your buyers and put them up against better trained sales folks. So negotiation was one. Second was what drew me to Ford to begin with, and that's understanding cost. Whether it's
I want to stop and go back to negotiation for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to elaborate just a bit more on, we talk about negotiation skills, and everybody will have their own definition of what that means. And for the benefit of executives, people who are listening here who are not familiar with good purchasing practices, let's just pretend you're on the CEO and I want to walk down the hall, talk and just visit my purchasing organization and just try to understand what's the state of the art, how are we doing, and are we properly understanding where we can apply good negotiation skills and how that works. So could you elaborate just a little bit more around, if you were going to go in and assess negotiation skills, you kind of touched on that earlier, right? The ability to negotiate with suppliers, but also within the organization. I'd like you to expand just a little bit, help us understand, what are you testing for? What are you looking for to give evidence to an executive that we do have or don't have the right kinds of skills? A little more granularity would be great.
Well, first of all, I phrased it as a fundamental skill. And to me, a fundamental skill is something you never walk away from and say we're complete. It's like, and I'm going to use some sports analogies, Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods won the Masters, but he still had a driving coach. He still had a putting coach. He still worked on his game and elements of his game every year, every week, every day. And I view negotiation that way, right? If you walk down and ask your chief purchasing officer, what are you doing day in and day out to improve the negotiation skills of your team? And they look at you blankly, the answer is you got a problem.
All right, awesome. And then you mentioned it cuts across functions too. Would you care to elaborate on that just a bit, or is just the purchasing folks?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer, and there's two types of negotiation fundamentally. There's competitive or positional bargaining, and there's collaborative or interest-based bargaining. The first fundamental rule of either one is shut up and listen, right? How you put that in practice cross-functionally, buyers always complain because engineers are picking suppliers. The print comes at cost. It's got the supplier's name on it. The supplier's already been pegged for development. And the buyer gets upset and walks down to engineering and starts talking about cost and how it's going to impact them from a cost perspective. And what the engineer hears is like the old Peanuts cartoon. Wah, 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 wah. They don't hear anything. First rule of either competitive or collaborative negotiations is shut up and listen. That engineer's taken a negotiation position. Tell me, Ron, you put the supplier's name on the print. Can you tell me why you did that? What can they deliver? How are they helping you achieve your goals? What goals are you trying to achieve? Let me get this straight. You put them on the print because for it's A, B, C, and D. If I can deliver another supplier that can deliver A, B, C, and D, will you entertain them? because it's my job to bring you suppliers that help you meet your objectives. And that's what I'm trying to do here. And at the same time, I'm trying to meet my objectives, which relate around cost. So shut up and listen to the engineer. Shut up and listen to the folks internally who are taking a stand that you don't like before you start negotiations. Right? Too often, especially for buyers, I always, when I'm training, I ask the question, the customer is always what? And in every culture, people put in right. Buyers are customers. We're used to being right. We get ticked off at the other party when they do something we don't like, and we want to tell them how stupid they are and how smart we are and how they're ruining our objectives. And the first rule is, hey, shut up and listen. Ask them why they took the position, what they're trying to achieve, how you can help them hit their goals, right? And then ask the question, if I can find another supplier, can we entertain it? And maybe the engineer is going to come back and he's already got the program manager on board. And it's too late. The ship has already sailed and it's going to be that supplier. And then you say, okay, what can we do so we don't have this happen again? Because I don't want to give you a supply base where you feel you've only got one choice.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I got the benefit of working with Jeff on a project not that long ago. We were taking a look at how a large organization would set and maintain pricing, right, which has some elements of this. It just made me think about one of the key things Jeff asked for is what's your documented process for setting pricing? And then right along with that is what's your documented process for settling on that, quote unquote, the negotiation part. And I'm guessing that would be something that, executive want to have some kind of they're looking for a documented process, right, that demonstrates that we're cutting across the functions and basically the timing of that, is it the correct timing? And is that a piece of what you suggest?
Yeah, I think one is having a documented process that you use, but as a fundamental skill, I expect it to be on job descriptions. What's a junior buyer supposed to do with regards to negotiation? What's a commodity manager supposed to do with regards to negotiation? Is it on the performance review process, right? What's captured in the performance review as far as negotiations? Is there an improvement plan for the year? I don't care if you're a great negotiator, right? I don't want to go when I have my knee replaced to a surgeon whose last class in surgery was 10 years ago. And they haven't picked up a book. They might have been a great surgeon 10 years ago, but are they today, right? And I view negotiation as the same way. There's some fundamental skills that stay forever, but the world is dynamic, and we'll talk about AI in a bit, right? The world is dynamic, and you got to keep up with your skill set.
All right, that's perfect. And that's exactly what I was looking for, is a little bit of a cookbook for I'll call it the novice manager. What should I be looking for? And there's a documented process. Show me the history. What are your plans? What's the data, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you. So let's pivot now. And I think we want to step next about understanding cost as a crucial skill set.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm hopelessly biased in this area because that's what drew me into purchasing to begin with, and I think that's a strength that frankly helped accelerate my career. Is the being able to understand cost. And we had a buyer from Mexico who was in one of our training sessions, and they phrased it so eloquently. I stole their phrase and use it constantly, and that is that cost is the common enemy of buyer and seller. We've got a common interest, a common enemy in cost, and we've got to understand it. And kind of why buyers need to understand it, kind of as an example, if my only skill set is issuing RFQs and comparing pricing, right? Frankly, I could go to Salem High School, get college grads that know that their $1.20 is bigger than a buck, and do the sourcing from that perspective. But what you need to know is what made up that $1.20, what made up that dollar, and how can you attack the cost? And I give an example from earlier on in my career. One of my buyers walked in and there was some cut and sew items that were sourced into northern Mexico. And the buyer walked in and said, I've got a 35% price reduction if I move this to Costa Rica. Okay. Will you sign off on it? Well, tell me what the difference is in cost structure between Mexico and Costa Rica, and we'll talk about it. Well, I don't know. Well, that's your job to know. So when you can come back and talk to me. He comes back and he goes, labor's 10% cheaper. I said, well, I know labor's 10% cheaper. That's easy, but that doesn't explain 35%. And kept asking why, and he dove into the cost structures. And what he found out, just by me constantly asking him why and refusing to budge, was all these suppliers in Mexico were right across the border from the U.S. So they're in a region where folks in Mexico don't want to live. The border has been for a long time kind of an undesirable area, right? So employees are bussed in. They had high turnover of over 10% per year of employees. They had a U.S. manager for every Mexico manager in some of the plants, right? Didn't trust them.
Lots of overhead.
That's all right. And in one case, the receptionist lived in the U.S. and crossed the border every day to run the phones. Right? So while they were in Mexico, they had a U.S. plus Mexico salary structure. So looking at those cost structures, we decided the best discussion to have was with the existing suppliers and laid out the problem as a joint problem to be solved. I've got this opportunity to move to Costa Rica. I don't want to, because as soon as we move to Costa Rica, we've got to manage it. The customer is going to the ultimate customer is going to stick their hand out and say, oh, Costa Rica, it's cheaper. Give us a cost reduction so we don't get the impact that we want. And I think it'd be better if you fixed your facilities. They go, what do you mean fix your facilities? We showed them what we found. That we think you'd be better off located 2 hours farther into Mexico, using all of your U.S.-based executives that are managing the plant. Get Mexico in, and we'll give you 3 years to do it. Put a plan together to alter your cost structure so you can compete with Costa Rica, right? If you can put a plan together, we'll stick with you through this, right? And oh, by the way, if our numbers are right, it's going to position you with your other customers as well, right? One of the rules of negotiations we've got is the rule of sevens, right? The advertisers say you got to hear something 7 times before the brand fixes in your head. And you think, oh, I've got to buy Carmex because Carmex is the best lip stuff in the world. And we use that in negotiations, right? Don't expect a CEO who's just talked to the board about their Mexico facility to buy the first time you tell them that they need to move, even if you're their largest customer, right? So rule of sevens is you got to talk to them and present the case 7 times before you start putting the sticks out, right? So carrots and sticks, right? Carrots and sticks in negotiation. We're big on identifying both, but we hold the sticks back until we get to round 6 or 7 of the negotiations. Focus on the carrots. It's going to help you reduce cost. It's going to help you compete better. You'll not have the turnover that you have. You'll have happier employees, right? Focus on those benefits that they were going to get and keep having the conversation. And oh, by the way, say, oh, I'm having the same conversation with your competitors because you know the competitive landscape and you're all in the same neighborhood, right? And the first one that moves gets the benefit, right? The first one that moves gets the benefit. And I think it was on the 5th discussion. We didn't have to go to 7, but I think on the 5th discussion, one of the CEOs cracked and said, we put together the math. You're right. That's where we need to go. So understand why, understand the cost structure. Don't just be the buyer who buys on cost. Understand that one involved not only total acquisition costs, right? You had to get the parts from Costa Rica to the U.S., total relationship cost. You have to invest in a brand new supplier and develop that brand new supplier and train them in your ways. There's a whole heck of a lot of cost that goes to training a supplier on how to deal with a multi-billion-dollar company, right? So we view total acquisition cost and total relationship cost as things that need to be factored into decisions like that. Right? Buyers need to understand those. I think one more, since I'm on a little bit of a rant, it sounds like, I feel like, is you mentioned commodity prices, right? Congrats to all the purchasing folks who've lived through the last 5 years, because you lived through something in the last 5 years that I didn't have to go through in 35 years of purchasing, right? The breadth, the number of commodities and cost drivers where prices increased dramatically in the last 3 years. Labor costs going up 26% for some manufacturers. Every commodity price going up. I never had to experience that. You had to go back in the 1970s in the U.S. to hit a time of inflation and price movement like we've had in the last 5 years, right? And in the 1970s, global sourcing for folks in Michigan was sourcing outside of Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, right? If you sourced to Alabama, that was high risk, right? You're getting out of the sweet spot. So you guys have had to deal with it over the course of the last 5 years, something that we never had to do it. And frankly, the skill sets to do the math, the basic math on how do you set up an index price agreement? How do you tie it to that index price agreement? That kind of math is lost to some buyers, right?
So I don't imagine you have some kind of a checklist or a process you might follow. If a customer said, "Hey, Jeff, you need to assess our organizational capabilities around understanding cost." Could you, let's just pretend that, we've got the CEO over lunch here or whatever, just going to give them your short punch list. As you go down there and take a look, what are the critical questions you need to ask, and what kind of evidence are you looking for in terms of data, process, documentation, et cetera? What's your quick mental checklist of key things I want to really understand to determine the degree to which this is an opportunity or a risk for us?
I'm going to reflect back when I was running a P&L division, had 2,800 people in that P&L division, right? The way I'd find out things like that wasn't from the top down. On a Friday, when I got a little bored, I would walk around to someone's desk and I'd say, "Hey, I saw you made this decision and this recommendation. Take me through your math. Just one-on-one. Walk me through." Now, while I liked those, my people might not have liked. I don't know if they started hiding and saying, it's Friday afternoon and Jeff's walking around again or not. But I kind of like those to touch base and really understand what's going on, because what I learned at Ford, and Ford was great about this, right? When you took a sourcing decision to the executive director in Ford North American Purchasing, it had been reviewed 15 times. The white paper had been reviewed 15 times. It was a polished piece of work, right? And I wonder if the executives understood how much work was going into those sourcing recommendations and sourcing papers and the presentation work to put on a polished show for them. And I must say, they were good about asking questions. So they probably knew when they were able to sort out with the buyers when the buyers were making the recommendations. And that's the other thing is, if you're a chief purchasing officer and your buyers 2 levels down are making recommendations, have them present them to you. Don't have your director present them to you. Have the buyers take ownership of the decisions and the recommendations that they're making.
All right. Cool. So Jim, there's quite a bit there to think about in terms of, if I don't know a lot about purchasing, what would good look like? So you're trying to detect how much of that's really going on and understanding the rationale, seeing if they actually have a process that's followed, right? And there's the correct, levels of approval and review, and not, overthinking it too much either at the same time.
And most executives got to be great executives because they ask great questions. I forget which president it was, and I don't really care. Someone had been in to visit one of the presidents, and they walked out and they said, "What'd you tell the president?" "What do you mean?" I sat there and he asked me questions for an hour. Thanked me for my time and sent me on my way, right? That's a leader that was learning a lot of information, right? Learning about what's going on. Most folks get to be CEOs, chief chief purchasing officers, chief operational officers are people who are good at asking questions to begin with. So just put yourselves in front of the buyers and ask away.
All right. Well, we're going to pivot now and talk about the third diagnostic. And it was a pleasant surprise that you chose this topic because, I was kind of thinking about, workforce development, organizational competencies, et cetera. And I think you want to talk now about technology and AI a little bit.
Yeah, I heard a quote the other day that, I'm prone to steal quotes when I find one I like, and I can't remember who said this. And the quote was, "Don't worry, AI is not going to replace you. Someone using AI is going to replace you." And about a year ago, we started looking at AI and we look at chat, right? And when I get ready to prep for a blog or for anything where I have to sit down and think, I get writer's block, right? I found that AI helps me with my writer's block, right? I've got a podcast with Ron today. Ron wants to talk about training. I need a couple of tidbits on negotiation. So I go to chat AI, say, give me some data on, my belief is not a lot of buyers have been trained in negotiation, right? So the question I asked chat was, investigate training for negotiation in purchasing. And it came back and told me how important it was, right? I said, but I asked what percent of buyers are actually trained in negotiation, and it wouldn't give me a percentage. It just talked about how important it was. I said, I know it's important. Tell me how many are actually trained in it. So sometimes you have to, Mike Wen, one of my guys, says you have to treat AI like an intern who knows nothing, right? You got to make the question simple. You got to keep asking it. And you got to tell it, no, you didn't give me what I wanted. Said, no, you didn't give me what I wanted. It came back with that Tennessee study that said 15% of purchasing professionals surveyed thought their company was not good at training on negotiation. Came back with some other information. So I use AI and it's enhanced my personal productivity. What we've been looking at AI for as well is, can I give AI cost breakdowns from 3 suppliers and have them analyze that and give me some questions to ask each supplier? The answer is yes. Can I have AI help me identify suppliers? Right? Go search the world. Go search Mexico. I need an injection molding supplier with these kind of capabilities. Can you find one for me? And the answer is AI can do that. So AI can make you more productive at your job if you have a thinking job, but don't expect it to give you polished result. But I should say this wrong, say this correctly. It will give you what looks like very polished results. If you ask AI to write you a blog on a specific topic, it will write you a blog. But you better know your details because it will mislead. It will, at this point in time, it will distort. It sometimes struggles with simple math. Someone had asked AI to subtract 27 from 343 and it got the answer wrong, right? I've gone at it with a data set where I had the physical part attributes and pricing for parts and ask it to create a cost model based upon the physical part attributes and the current pricing. It will create one, but you got to know enough to check its math right now, right? So I think there's some great things you can do with AI. I think it's going to get smarter as it goes along, right? I find when I go into chat, I started off with chat, and then there was Chat GPT, and now there's Chat 4.0. And this is all within the period of 6 months. So if you're not getting on board now and starting to understand, you're going to miss all these iterations that are happening with AI, happening with the different platforms, and frankly, you're going to be left behind. Good news is it's not too late, right? I was interviewing someone for an internship position, junior, probably going to go into their senior year. What have you learned in college about AI? Nothing. None of the coursework yet. Now, I bet that they're using it to write term papers. I didn't ask that, right?
Yeah, so that begs the question then. I mean, this is a dynamic, rapidly changing aspect of capabilities and skills organizations need to have, right? That their teams need to be more skillful at doing. And there probably isn't, a resource you can go to, with studies and associations and what are other people doing and leveraging best practices. I'm imagining it's very dynamic. So if you were asked by an organization to come in and help them quickly walk through and assess the degree to which we're successful leveraging AI in our procurement organization, what are some of the things that you'd want to go look for to see whether or not they're doing it well and if that's a real opportunity?
One is I'm not sure. It's so new. I'm not sure I can define what well is yet, right? But if you're not at least trying, if you're not at least investigating, you need to, because I think manufacturing and industry as a whole, sometimes we act like a lot of lemmings, right? At one point in time, there was a rush to source to China. So every CEO was talking about sourcing to China in their annual report. Then COVID hits, and now we're going to make where we sell and we're going to buy where we make. So it's all about localization now, right? And folks started talking about that after the supply chain issues related to COVID. I think that investors are going to start pushing in shareholder meetings and asking the question, what is your AI strategy? And as a leader within a company, I want to be working on it before the CEO comes to me and says, what are you doing? And say, I'm not doing anything. Well, I'm being asked by the board, what are we doing with AI? And we got to come up with something, right? And I've been in those kind of modes before, kind of panic modes where you're trying to put something together for the board and say, yeah, we know we've got a course when frankly we didn't have, right? I think this is going to be the course. I think within the next year and a half, 2 years, you'll start seeing when you go into shareholder meetings or look at annual reports that the CEOs, the chairman is going to be talking about what they're doing to leverage AI in their business because it's got a huge potential. And I don't think of it in the negative sense of reducing the number of employees. I'm just thinking about delivering better product. I think it's made me a better writer of blogs since I started using AI to help me write my blogs. The thoughts are still mine, but I'm treating AI as kind of this fireside chat. If I could dial Ron up and say, hey, Ron, I'm thinking about doing a blog on this topic. What are your thoughts? Right? I rarely do that with anyone, right? But I'll do it with AI, right? I'll do it with AI.
Interesting. Let's pivot to the second part of this podcast. And you've already given us some good tidbits, right? So you've helped us understand what those three key areas are. What are the things, why are those important? What's the opportunity and risk associated with it? And how do you assess it and determine if there's a real gap? So let's assume that our audience has looked at these things and said, yep, we've got a gap. We need to close those gaps. Could you give us a little practical advice on how to go about lifting those negotiation skills, improving capabilities around understanding cost and leveraging AI?
Yeah, and I will, if you ask me the question, well, Jeff, did you do this when you were a chief purchasing officer? The answer is no, right? But that is first, what's your negotiation strategy? Every year when you do your business plan, when you do your report to manager, what are you doing from a negotiation standpoint? Now, I will say, every stop along the way, I made sure my buyers had negotiation training. I made sure we were implementing what they learned, that they were bringing back and saying, this is how I used the prep sheet in negotiations. These are the skills I used. Here's how the negotiation went. Here's how I'm going to do it differently next time, right?
So build a playbook, basically.
Build a playbook. Start working it and treating it as a foundational skill that you're working on, not only when you put your annual business plan together, but week to week, month to month. What are you doing on negotiations with your team?
What do you think would be a healthy form of measurement and control that our organization should think about, specifically around negotiations? So here's what's running through my head. You can tell me what you think, but I would say, what percentage of the spend is actually being worked on any given year, right? Or in terms of the number of SKUs, or we're doing an 80-20 analysis and picking out, and do we have a plan for building that? And we're actually going to measure our progress toward, working on those things. Or, these are the sorts of things that are going to be a very high risk for us in the organization. We've got to completely rethink it. What would be, some metrics, leading indicators, controls that you think would be important to put in place?
Well, one, I think, first of all, you have a cost reduction playbook, right? A cost reduction metric. I'm a big believer that cost reduction metric needs to be tied to the bottom line. Before COVID, we did a survey, and what we found was that over 50% of the CEOs questioned whether their purchasing organization was bringing bottom line results or not. When we asked chief purchasing officers how they were being measured, it was PO to PO variance. So the same CEOs that were questioning whether their purchasing organizations were driving value were driving metrics on PO to PO instead of do all the math out to the bottom line. If you saved $1, how much did sales give away to the customer? How much was the engineering expense on that? How much actually impacted my P&L? And to me, that's the metric that needs to be there. A subset of that then is, okay, what were all these cost reductions and which ones were tied to pure negotiation? Negotiated with the suppliers for price decreases. So it's kind of a subset of that overall cost management metric, but it needs to be there. The other metric that's important to me is sitting down with managers and saying, what's your plan with Bill, the new buyer, in developing their negotiation skill sets? A coach watches their pro tennis player play tennis and then offers them tips after the game. So be a coach. Watch your buyer negotiate. I know it's hard. Set and shut up during the negotiation. Let the buyer handle it, right? And watch how they do. Watch how they do and give them feedback. And are managers doing that? Are they being coaches, right? It's one thing to put it, and I know I've talked about it, put it on the job description, another to put it on the performance appraisal. It's another thing to do periodic coaching as well, right? So I think those things need to be in play.
Yeah, awesome. All right. What about moving on to, I think, the second core area, which is around understanding costs? What would be your practical tips for, we've got a gap here. What do we do to close that gap?
Well, one is, if you're measuring your different types of cost reduction activity, I expect to see some value analysis, value engineering ideas, some Kaizen kind of ideas, and the math associated with those, right? That prove out things. If you're doing total acquisition cost or, total impact to the bottom line of cost reduction, you're forcing the organization in to start to adopt a cost mentality and develop those skill sets that you want to see.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of jargon things there, value engineering, Kaizen, et cetera. And maybe for our novice audience that may not be familiar with those terms, or we talked about value engineering, just give it a little bit of an example of an actual value engineering project you would have worked on that would demonstrate good skills in value engineering. Just a quick little example of that.
Well, value analysis and value engineering, two kind of separate topics, but just to put an easy umbrella on it, buyers go to their suppliers and say, give me your cost reduction ideas. And the supplier says, gee, if we can change this, I can save you 50 cents. Right? If the buyer understands cost structure, he can validate that idea. If a buyer doesn't understand cost structure and the only thing they know how to do is market test, right? And they think that the supplier's idea isn't worth 50 cents, it's worth $1, right? They go and market test the supplier's idea, right? Congratulations. That'll be the last suggestion that supplier ever gives you, right? That has any element of truth to it. So buyers can understand cost can validate those kind of ideas. When sales, their initial response when sales says, I need a cost for this immediately, they don't say, well, I don't have time to call the supplier. They've got the ability to answer what will it cost questions, right? I had a good executive reported to at Ford Motor Company that could make the complex seem simple. And I call them Maxiisms because his name is Eddie Maxi. And one Maxiism when it came to pricing cost was, Jeff, you should know the answer to the question before you ask it. Which question? What will it cost? You're doing a good job if before you send the RFQ, you have a good idea what it's going to cost. Right? And that's kind of what I look for in a purchasing organization. Can they answer the question quickly? What will this cost?
Okay. Other tools or wickets that people can use for that?
You can buy sophisticated tools, but the problem with sophisticated tools is it takes sophisticated people to run them and understand them. And the worst thing to do is we've seen companies launch sophisticated tools that can estimate things, and they provide the buyer an estimate, and the buyer then goes to the supplier and says, you've got to make it for this price because, this software we just bought says it should be this price. The buyer who really works it says to the estimator or the expert internally that's creating that estimate, they go through and ask it a lot of questions about why that's a valid cost, right? Where did the labor cost in this model come from? Well, it's an average of the U.S. Well, my suppliers aren't an average of the U.S. My suppliers are in Michigan. Union wages, $25 an hour, unfringed, right? Let's up the model for that. Can't, right? So they're asking questions of the estimate and they're asking questions of the supplier as well. And I said earlier, first trick to negotiation is shut up and listen, right? So when you get the estimate from the estimating software, the estimation expert, shut up and listen and ask a lot of questions about it. How'd you come up with these costs? Where these cost structures come from? Then go to the supplier and understand their cost, right? Understand the variance between the two. Don't just use the internal estimate as a hammer to beat the supplier up, because then you're into a competitive negotiation and you're not learning anything, right? As a buyer, you want to learn things, I believe.
So before we pivot and talk more about the AI idea, which is fantastic, fascinating in and of itself, anything else around, understanding costs you want to touch on before we pivot to that?
No, I think in a really sophisticated organization, I do not like the term should cost. I know it's got a lot of buzz, but whatever we do as purchasers to develop costs, it's an estimate. And what I want to look at is my estimates over time versus how my suppliers quoted and their variance to that estimate, right? And if I understand what my estimation model provides and what my supplier normally quotes, then I can get to predictive pricing. I know if my estimate says $2, I've got an 84% probability that one of my suppliers is going to quote $2.05 or less. So if I've got that math in place and it's easy enough to do, right? Then when sales comes and says, what's this going to cost? The buyer can answer the question with confidence. So you want to be able to progress to that kind of a level on costing as far as I'm concerned.
Perfect. Well, let's pivot to that last area then. Fascinating, AI and how we leverage that in procurement and supply management.
Well, one is just dive in and start playing with it, right? If you look at it, you can use Excel now. If you played with the add-ins that are available in Excel, right? You can access the Federal Reserve database for labor cost, overhead cost, copper cost, aluminum cost via Excel, right? So you can build and refresh your Excel spreadsheets with data from the Federal Reserve. You can embed chat into your Excel spreadsheets as well and start asking some analytical questions and just start playing with it, right? Start playing with it as you would if you wanted to pick up a new hobby, right? If you wanted to start playing golf, you just go start playing golf. Go start playing with AI. Sign up. It's $20 a month to sign up for the for the more premium version of chat. And I get my $20 a month benefit out of it just by it helping me write papers. I know some organizations are using it for supplier communications, right? Helping draft and communicate with suppliers. I know some folks are playing with it for keeping tabs of minutes of meetings and actually being the recorder on the meetings. We haven't played with it for those kinds of things because we tend to be a smaller company. Our meetings are a little bit less complex than what goes on in other companies. But I know some folks that are playing with it in those areas. And right now they're just playing, right? Are they getting a benefit out of it? The answer is yes, if they're using it right. I think you can get an immediate benefit out of AI and save yourself some time. But I think the other thing is you don't want to be the person 2 years from now when someone says, what are you doing with AI? And you say, well, nothing. I guess I better get to it. Because by that point in time, your learning curve is going to be extremely steep.
Yeah, and you got left behind.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. If people wanted to talk to you, get in touch with you, pick your brain a little bit, ask for you to expand on some of these things you've shared, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Ping me on LinkedIn or email me at jburris@apurchasingd.com. I answer my emails every day.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you. Fantastic job. I really am grateful you could spend some time with us here.
Thanks. I appreciate that you invited me.
Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.